Hello and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're at. My name is Erin Wagoner, Foundation Specialist with Corporate Partner Services for CHIME, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar, Digital Transformation in the Next Normal, How Consumerism, Technology, and the Pandemic are Accelerating the Future. Before we get started with the presentation, I'm just going to cover a few technical details. The Q&A area is located on your screen option bar. This will allow you to ask questions during today's presentation. To ask a question, type your message into the Q&A chat box and press the send key. The speakers will try and answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. Now, if you're having difficulty listening to the live audio stream through your computer speakers, teleconferencing is available. To display the teleconference instructions, click on the Communicate menu to view the audio options. By attending today's session, you will earn up to 1 continuing education credit. Please be sure to visit the CHIME website for more details. And also, if you could too, take a few moments to complete the evaluation that's automatically going to pop up in your web browser at the end of this session. We would really appreciate it. Your feedback is really helpful for all of our future programming. And just a quick reminder, guys, all the registrants for this event will receive a copy of the slides and a link to the session recording following the webinar. Now, with that said, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers for today's session. With us today is Paddy, and Paddy, you know, I always skip the last name. I love you though. CEO of Damo Consulting, and Ed Marx, Chief Digital Officer of the HCI Group. Welcome, Paddy and Ed. I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you very much, Erin, for that really kind introduction. And thank you all for joining us on this webinar. I am really pleased to have my co-author of our new book on the webinar with me as well. And we're going to talk about some of the core messages in the book that we wrote. And I'm also going to be sharing some insights from recent research that my firm, Damo Consulting, has done in partnership with CHIME. So hopefully you'll find this to be an informative session. We are going to be talking about what is really happening on the ground today and what digital transformation is looking like for all the health systems that Ed and I are working with today. So here's the book. Those of you who have not seen this, you can get it anywhere you shop for books, especially online, but you can also get it on Ed's personal website and mine. The book is called Healthcare Digital Transformation, How Consumerism, Technology, and Pandemic are Accelerating the Future. The authors, that's the two of us. My name is Paddy, as Erin's introduced, and my colleague Ed here is Chief Digital Officer of the HCI Group and Tech Mahindra. And prior to that, he was CIO of Cleveland Clinic, which is where we actually worked together and got the idea for writing the book. And we're going to share some of our insights in the writing of the book and also the contents of the book. So jumping right into the presentation, I wanted to share a little bit of research that my firm did. As everybody knows, the first 6 months of this year have been very challenging financially for most health systems. So my team put together this chart of 17 health systems that have announced their results up until the second quarter. And you can see the bar chart here that shows operating income or loss for the first half of 2020 and compares that against the same period for the previous year. And there's no surprises here. Most health systems have seen a significant decline in their operating income. And a couple of them have actually seen losses. There's only one exception, I think, to this rule, and that is over on the far left, which is Kaiser. But for the most part, it does seem that everyone's had to take a financial hit because of what happened due to the pandemic. And some of the reasons that were quoted in the earnings releases, and we have reproduced them here on the left so you can get a sense. Well, work stoppage and the closure of services such as suspension of elective procedures and so on in March and April, that has really been a big contributor to the financial performance. And the cost burden, the additional cost burdens related to buying hospital supplies, including PPE for dealing with the surge in COVID-19 cases. That was another big factor. And an interesting one is that a few of the health systems stated that they have seen a decline in returns from their investments due to the volatile US and global financial markets. That's an interesting one because it goes to show how important non-traditional income sources have become in the financial performance of healthcare enterprises. And what is the outlook for the coming year? The volumes and operating revenue will continue to be impacted by the pandemic and driven by many factors, including but not limited to the duration and severity of the pandemic. That's the snapshot of where we are today. We're well into Q3 of the year, and we've been dealing with the pandemic for a good couple quarters. Ed, any comments on this? Anything here that surprises you?
Yeah, really no surprise. I think you explained it really well. The one saving grace for many of these health systems is some of the relief package that was given, and so they were able to shore up some of their margins as a result. But yeah, it's been very difficult, obviously.
So telehealth and digital, looking beyond COVID-19. So, we have seen that in the immediate wake of the pandemic, COVID-19 has accelerated the timelines of digital transformation. And Ed and I, we keep talking about this. We hear all the time that what was supposed to happen over a 5-year period has now been compressed to a timeline of 5 months. And so people are accelerating their investments in telehealth, in virtual care models, in online patient engagement, and digital front door solutions. So the upshot of all this is that virtualization of care is going to penetrate deeper and deeper into healthcare services. We're going to see significant portions of ambulatory care shifting to online models, and everyone seems to acknowledge that. Now, I will caveat that by saying that recent data shows that this extreme swing towards virtual visits and telehealth visits has kind of pulled back a little bit, and we're seeing a corresponding increase in in-person visits to hospitals. And that's for a couple of reasons. Obviously, you cannot deliver healthcare virtually for all kinds of care indefinitely and forever. And then, a lot of pent-up demand because of whether it's a routine care or whether it is elective procedures and so on, that's coming back now. So we are seeing some kind of a pullback, but we're still seeing that the needle has shifted significantly towards virtual care. It's going to remain that way. We are seeing some new modalities come into play, especially as a consequence of the pandemic. One of them is contactless and low contact visits, what I refer to as drive-through experiences that now routine care looks like and feels like. Digital leaders, as a consequence of all this, must develop and implement roadmaps in line with the strategic priorities for the enterprise, not just looking at the here and now, but also looking 3, 4, 5 years into the future. CIOs, and many of us in this audience are CIOs, they have to transform IT in order to support digital transformation. And when you talk about digital experiences, you also need a robust backend infrastructure to enable it. And technology decisions now must deliver enterprise-level impact instead of departmental and functional priorities. Ed, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think another data point, Paddy, of the major emphasis that you've made on the slides is that when we did another CHIME focus group maybe a month ago, we asked the same question, like, where were you, just on outpatient visits as one marker, where were you pre-pandemic, and what was your high watermark, and what have you retreated to? And the average of about 30 of our fellow CHIME CIOs, the average was, if I'm rounding up, so this will be a little gracious, 1% pre-COVID, right? We're doing routine outpatient telehealth visits. And it went up to about 70%. One was as high as 80. Many were around 60 and in the mid 70s. And then it came down to about 25%. And then since then, there's been another study that was commissioned that showed the average about 20%. So you're right. We had this huge accelerator, but then it's come down and it looks like it's settling around 20%. Sometimes I get a little disappointed about that, but at the same time, on the positive side, that's a huge increase going from 1% to 20% in such a short period of time. So it's definitely here to stay. and we need to do the things that we're going to talk about here shortly in terms of keeping that momentum going.
So earlier this week, Modern Healthcare published the results of a survey that they did called the Power Panel CEO. And they actually asked a handful of questions, and this is good background and context for what we're going to talk about. You know, the questions that they asked the CEO panelists was, what kind of digital tools are they now investing in to help their patients? And you can see on the left that they're talking about mobile apps, they're talking about telehealth, obviously. They're using electronic health records and possibly using the digital functionalities that are now being incorporated into these platforms. AI, data analytics, that's become front and center, especially as it relates to remote care models, provider-facing mobile apps, chatbots, and so on. So you can see kind of the sequence of priorities, and obviously telehealth is right on top over there. And most of them have also reported that their focus on consumerism has increased since the pandemic. And this is an important shift, and this is kind of one of the big themes in our book, where we talk about how consumerism, technology, and pandemic are accelerating the future. This is the first leg of that stool, the three-legged stool, if you will. Consumerism is definitely front and center now, especially since you're now trying to build digital experiences and trying to engage with consumers digitally, finding them, engaging with them, and having them come in and schedule appointments and take health coaching and all the other stuff. Right? And what I referred to earlier, which is these types of programs are going to become part of a growing trend, feeling like a drive-through experience. Today, you can actually, like ordering a Starbucks coffee, you can order, a lab test online. You pay for it online. You actually get a drive-through lab test. Or if you have to go into a facility, you pull up and you wait in the parking lot because they know you're there because of the geo-tracking. And then they tell you to wait. And they tell you when to come in. You go in, you get your blood work done, and you're gone. So it's going to feel like a drive-through experience more and more. This is kind of how we see healthcare CEOs now approaching consumerism in a COVID-19 era. There's also a few more data points here that point to the fact that digital health is set to grow exponentially. We looked at the VC funding data. VC funding is growing gangbusters. It's continued to stay that way throughout the pandemic. Unprecedented amounts of funding into startups. And now lately, for those who are keeping track, a number of digital health companies are also going IPO. So they seem to be in a very good place. Big dollar amounts are being committed. Baptist Health made an announcement last month that they're committing $100 million to total digital transformation. That's not small change. And that is pretty much indicative of what the big health systems are committed based on what we're seeing. Non-traditional players, technology firms are getting into the act. Google invested $100 million in Amwell, which is also now scheduled to go IPO. And we're talking, the Livongo and Teladoc merger, which is one of those big consolidation moves that's creating these digital health giants, which are going to become more and more important in the future. So Ed, any commentary from the last slide on this one in terms of what you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, no, completely agree. And you just need to look at your corner drugstore, right? We'll probably stop referring them as the corner drugstores to your health hub. So I know all around, I live in Dallas-Fort Worth. It's clear, that our CVS stores, more and more square footage is being devoted to ambulatory healthcare. And so that's a whole nother segment where there's a ton of investment being made. A lot of it's internal, so it doesn't make the headlines necessarily, but tons of investment being made and they are going digital first. So while they will obviously have a physical presence, it's also heavily reliant on digital technologies. So like you're saying, Paddy, not only big tech getting involved and major players pumping in a lot of money into the market to develop digital tools, but your local or not so local retail is getting in the game, not to mention Walmart as well, that made a lot of headlines recently. So it's here to stay. These are great data points. So it's very difficult for anyone anymore to say, no, I don't need to worry about it. It's just a passing fad. It's not. It is here to stay. And it's just going to get more and more in our experience, in our environment. So you really have to be purposeful and create plans around this for your health system or hospital.
That is actually a perfect segue to this cartoon, right? Non-traditional players are moving aggressively into healthcare, and Ed mentioned, he didn't mention by name, but CVS Aetna is one of those that he was referring to, in addition to Walmart and Walgreens. And so these unidentified flying objects that these two gentlemen are looking at are these kind of, just, you can put a name to each one of those objects. Put Walmart there, CVS Aetna, you've got Walgreens, and then you've got all these emerging players, these digital first healthcare companies, Livongo, Teladoc, Amwell, Omada, they're all, out there somewhere, not to mention the big tech firms like Apple and Amazon and Microsoft and Google. They're all going to make some kind of a play. What this means is really that the competitive landscape is shifting, and in a zero-sum game, they are going to take market share from the incumbents. And so digital transformation in that context becomes even more front and center.
Yeah, and Paddy, it's even more, right? I think Ohio State very recently made a relationship with one of these digital first practices. And these practices, so you used to be, you only had to care about your geography, like they'll never come into our city because we're so dominant. But guess what? They are in your city, and it was a bold move. But one of these companies made a big inroad into Cleveland. And think about that. You've got some great institutions in healthcare in Cleveland, and this digital first company has come into their territory. So it's a whole new game. Right.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So I want to share a few data points from CHIME online focus group discussions that we did in July 2020. And here are some of the highlights. EHR systems are the primary platforms today for digital health and digital transformation for most health systems. IT leaders are beginning to explore standalone platforms, and that is an important shift, and we'll discuss why. And this is important because now in order to create these superior digital experiences, you can no longer just rely on what is available in the EHR system. Adoption rates for telehealth models are tied to reimbursement. So the big reimbursement questions are still out there, and people want some clarity and some level of comfort on what the reimbursements are going to be and whether they're going to become permanent and so on and so forth. But definitely, as with everything to do with healthcare, reimbursements are an important aspect of the shift towards digital. Telehealth continues to rise, but virtual visits are dropping off as patients start returning to hospitals. I talked about that a little while ago. And remote care models are emerging, but it's creating a new set of challenges. You're not only talking about remote patients, but you're also talking about caregivers who are going remote. And what does that mean in terms of managing a vast remote workforce that till a few months ago was pretty much on campus? And it creates a lot of IT security challenges, and we've seen significant incidents of that. And it also creates a whole workforce management set of challenges that need to be addressed as organizations shift towards digital. Right. Ed, any quick comments on any of these before I actually start talking about the charts? Yeah.
No, let's jump right in.
So I'll just blow through these 3 or 4 charts, and then we'll stop for a little bit of commentary, Ed. So what we did during the focus groups was we ran a bunch of polling questions. We asked about the impact of COVID-19. Most of our participants acknowledged that COVID-19 has been a financial challenge, but at the same time, they also acknowledge that COVID-19 has become an opportunity. So it depends on how you look at it. It's certainly an opportunity if you're looking to accelerate your shift towards digital, which is what we're seeing a lot of health systems doing and the approach that they're taking. New opportunities in the virtualization of care and recognition that some types of care are more amenable to telehealth than others. And then, of course, the overall level of telehealth has shifted significantly, in the direction of virtualization of care. A couple other things. What is the definition of digital health? Well, most of our participants said it's about real-time virtual consults for ambulatory care, and that is obviously influenced by what they're seeing and experiencing in the wake of the pandemic. But if you see the quote over there on the right, which is verbatim from the conversations, when I think of digital health, I think about a patient being completely independent and interacting with a health system through digital tools. This is a significant mindset shift, because you're talking about patients becoming completely independent, which means giving them self-service tools and the ability to access and gain access to care and get treated or diagnosed through online tools. And so programs such as tele-ICU, teleradiology, which have already been in existence for a while, are now being augmented with a lot of virtual consult and digital patient engagement technologies. This is what we heard from the CIOs who participated in the focus group. We asked about their digital transformation strategies. Well, I already mentioned earlier that EHRs are seen as the primary platforms, and therefore it's not surprising that EHR, the landing point, landing station, if you will, for digital initiatives, and creating seamless online patient relationships is now a priority, which means you no longer can rely on just the EHR. You have to build on top of the EHR, and which is a strategy that we're seeing a lot of health systems now embracing, that you identify best-in-class tools and technologies and pull them all together, stitch them together, if you will, and create these seamless patient relationships. There's a long way to go in terms of creating the sort of experiences we are used to in consumer banking or e-commerce or retail, but it's definitely headed in the right direction. And the digital transformation function, obviously the audience that we were talking to was CIOs, but it was also surprising to hear, for me at least, that most CIOs are also responsible for the digital function in most health systems. Now, I have to caveat that by saying that a number of leading health systems have actually created full-time chief digital officer roles, but the majority of health systems out there are using digital functions as part of the CIO's role and mandate. And in some cases, it is a shared responsibility with others. There's obviously some upsides to this because it's already technology enabled, and but at the same time, the downside is that there's a lot of fragmented efforts that are happening in different departments, and there's also the challenge that people may see a lot of digital initiatives as IT projects, which is something that we caution everybody to look out for. And then finally, budgets. Most health systems don't have separate digital transformation budgets. Most of them actually fund it out of their IT budgets. And that's kind of what we've found here. So before we go to the next slide, Ed, I'd love to hear your commentary on what these charts are saying about the current state of digital maturity.
Yeah, so the good news is we are maturing. So we're moving forward. We've long talked about, and CHIME's done a great job to really help us CIOs really move. We talked about, CIO 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and COVID really pushed a lot of us into the 3.0, sort of that highest level. I think we're working on 4.0 now, sort of that higher level. And so that's good. So we're seeing this maturity, and despite maybe a little bit lack of preparedness, it was amazing how the entire community did perform so well. And now it's about keeping that momentum going. And so one of the points you were making was about the role of the CDO. And yeah, we are seeing in some of the larger health systems bringing in CDOs, and they're coming from outside industry. So this is right. New. And so, our advice really, and we talk about it a little bit in the book, is hire people from outside of healthcare. So if you don't do it, you're sort of shortchanging, I think, your digital strategy, because no one has the same experience outside of healthcare. So if you're only healthcare and you have a little bit of a view on consumerism, but it's a completely different if you worked for Kimberly-Clark or a Walmart or some consumer-oriented organization. And so when you bring in that thinking to your team, it really will help you and help you lead your digital strategy. Because if you don't, my assessment is, and we've seen this many times, again, at some of the larger health systems, if you don't, someone else will come in from the outside. And then that always is an interesting relationship, how that's configured. Is it a peer to a CIO? Is it under the CIO? Does the CIO report? We've seen it all, every model. But we would just recommend that before that were to happen, really establish yourself as the digital leader. And one way of doing that is hiring people from outside of healthcare to really strengthen your capabilities and your view. Because it really is that, one of the other things, and I'll end with this, Paddy, is sort of the mind shift that it takes. It's no longer like this transactional relationship that you have with patients, but it's really around the concept of an experience. And that's what everyone wants. That's what the patients want. And that's how you can differentiate yourself. So earlier this week, I did my first travel to a health system, and I was with the C-suite. It was an interesting experience too, because, we had to wear a mask, and you're delivering some analysis for them on digital, and everyone's wearing a mask. It offers a little bit a different dynamic, and you really have to look at other parts of the body to determine feedback. But anyways, the important part here is that everyone's thinking about, not everyone, but many progressive health systems, about the experience, what it's like for the patient, for the clinician. And so it's this mind shift. So if you don't have it yet, CHIME is an excellent place to get some of that knowledge and from your peers and working with others, but really start thinking about things from a consumer-centric point of view, no longer a sort of a technical hospital point of view.
Thank you, Ed. That was good. That was very explanatory. Yeah. So in my field, this is in the book as well. This is one of the couple of frameworks that I'm going to talk about in this presentation. This one we discuss at great length in the book. And this is a maturity model to help understand, to help health systems understand where they are in terms of their current digital maturity and where their peers are. So, each one kind of builds on top of the other. If you start at maturity model 1, your primary focus is on leveraging whatever is available in the EHR platform to build your digital roadmap and your digital experiences. So you're focusing on specific functionalities. Maybe you have Epic, and so you're focusing on how you can get the most out of MyChart and how you can use the native capabilities of the platform in order to enable video consults. But pretty soon, you're going to find out that if you really want to create a best-in-class experience for your patient consumers, you're going to have to go beyond EHR systems, because the EHR systems cannot be everything for everybody. And they'll be the first ones to acknowledge it. So you have to now go to model 2, which is where you're focusing on digital initiatives that enable you to virtualize your care delivery models. Now, especially now in the context of COVID, those priorities have come up, further up on the list. So telehealth, e-visits, digital front doors, which is just some of the way of saying all of the digital engagement touch points in a patient journey, which you can use tools to enable. Remote monitoring, which so far has been mostly talked about in the context of population health management and chronic conditions and so on. But now it's going to be a part of primary care and routine care needs as well. And patient communication. How do you really improve and up the game on how you communicate in a multimodal fashion with your patients? It's SMS chat, IVR, all of that put together, right? So now you've got your mobile apps and everything. Model 3 and Model 4 are the more mature health system. The Model 4 is really the most mature kind of health systems. These are enterprises that are making long-term strategic bets with multi-year investments that are committed at a board level. These are comprehensive enterprise level transformation strategies driven by maybe a dedicated leader, driven with not just the short term, but the long term in view, and focusing on building 1 or 2 key strategic partnerships alongside the EHR. The EHR is never going away. The EHR is going to be a core part of your enablement, but you're also now going to build 1 or 2 key strategic partnerships and maybe a set of smaller ones with best-in-class startups. And you have a robust governance model to leverage the startup ecosystem so that you're getting access to the best-in-class, but you're managing the risks as well. This is what we find as far as the digital maturity is concerned. And our observations in the market tell us that while most organizations are in model 1, a handful of leading organizations are actually showing the way and leading in terms of how to really operate at model 4, which is where everyone eventually is going to have to be because of competitive pressures and because of consumerism and what consumers are beginning to expect. So a lot of health systems who are in model 1 are now consciously moving to model 2. We see this kind of across the board. Ed, any comments on this at a high level?
Yeah, I think it's great to have a model, and I would really just challenge all of my peers to figure out where you are, and there's no judgment. You just got to be brutally honest, because once you know where you are, and you can identify where you want to get to, then you can build that strategy. So if you find yourself like most in model 1, that's fine. And then if you aspire to be model 4, and we suggest you should, start building out that plan with your key stakeholders to get there. So it's a great model and framework for very practical. So it's great that it's in the book.
And here's another framework that is also in the book. This is a way to really look at the technology vendor landscape. Now, technology vendor choices are very, very critical in enabling digital transformation. You have to get it right the first time. And if you don't, then you're going to not only spend a lot of time and money, but you're going to lose competitive advantage in the marketplace. So we've broken it out into 4 categories. The custodians are basically the EHR firms. They have the data and the workflow. The innovators are the ones who are the startups. They have a whole new way of doing it. Carefully assess the innovation landscape out there. There's a lot of really interesting solutions that are coming out that can accelerate your transformation. And so, but at the same time, you have to manage the risk. The enabler platforms, these are platforms that the big cloud platforms, the health cloud platforms, such as Salesforce, that you can license, but you have to build on top of it. So there's really a lot of work involved on building on top of it, configuring it, and building new solutions on top of it. These are robust and scalable, and they leverage best practices across sectors. So the advantage here is that you get to see what other industry sectors are doing that they've already built into their platforms. And then, of course, the last category is all the consulting firms that will help you put all this together, integrate it, maybe customize it, maybe new development, and so on and so forth. So you have to really understand the attributes of the vendor landscape and understand how they operate, what motivates them, and choose your partnerships carefully. It's no longer, since you're no longer now going to be relying on the EHR platform to do everything for you, you really have to get a good understanding of what your technology vendor landscape looks like and how it is maturing and changing. In my firm, for instance, we track about 100 different technology firms and what they're doing. We track how they're consolidating. We track the new products that they're launching. And as part of the work too, we evaluate a lot of them. So we have a really good understanding of what is going on in the market. The good news, there's a lot of innovation out there. Challenge is to really stay on top of it and make the most informed choices and future-proof yourself, at least for a 3 to 5 year window, so that you're not having to revisit your decisions in a very short time. Any comments on this, Ed?
Yeah, so it's great. You take the framework from before, hey, I want to go from model 1 to model 4, and then you figure out which you're going to play in all these different areas with all these different types of partners, but which ones are you going to need to invest with and co-invest, partner with more than the others? And you start developing a super plan. So it's a really practical sort of frameworks.
We're coming to the last couple of slides straight from our book. This is how do you really get digital transformation right? And Ed and I spent a long time, kind of comparing notes on what we had both seen in the marketplace. As many of you probably know, we started writing this book in 2019, and the little backstory here, we were about to go to press with the book in early 2020. In February, we had actually handed the manuscript to the publisher, and then when the pandemic hit, we decided to hold off. We took a quarter, and we wanted to see what was going on in the marketplace. We wanted to validate whether the themes that we had talked about in the book were still going to hold up, or whether things had changed. And the good news is that things had changed, but in a very positive way. Things had accelerated, and a few new priorities have kind of come into the mix. But for the most part, the fundamental principles of getting digital transformation right have not changed. This is based on the work that Ed's done in his role as CIO with several organizations, the 150 interviews that we conducted, and of course, the consulting that my firm does. So we broke it down into a handful of principles. Number one, develop a digital roadmap for the enterprise. So you have to know where you're going. You have to develop a roadmap, and make sure that everyone in the organization is aligned around it. Have a governance model to drive the transformation initiatives. Make sure there's cross-functional buy-in and alignment, and do it early in order to get success, because you don't want to do it after the fact. And when Ed and I worked together at Cleveland Clinic, we had, I think, an extended group of maybe over 60 individuals from across functions who were very closely involved in the process over several months. So when time came for Ed to really present the roadmap to the board, everyone knew about it. There were no surprises in the roadmap. One thing we're seeing also is consider, we've seen one or two big health systems do this. Consider setting up a digital transformation office. And the reason you do that is to provide the transformation function with the degree of focus that it needs in order to keep all the initiatives on track, make sure it's getting funded, make sure they're getting the stakeholders and the owners are getting the support that they need. Otherwise, if it's a part-time job for a CIO or some other senior executive, it's only going to get part of the attention from that individual. And that can slow down progress in the transformation. Continue to revisit your enterprise roadmap and continue to learn from best practices in the industry. There's a lot of published case studies. Technology vendors are going to be able to tell you a lot of interesting things about what they're doing with other health systems, and of course through organizations such as CHIME, which does a wonderful job of, I think, getting community interaction among the CIO community. It's a fantastic platform to really understand what the best practices are. And then, Ed likes to talk about new financial thinking. There used to be a way you would do all of these investment calculation and business cases and so on. And there's a whole new way you have to look at it now. The risks are different. The payback periods are different. There's a lot of uncertainty. And so you have to kind of deal with a lot of unknowns when making these decisions. And then it's going to be a challenge to seek new investment and not show some cost savings elsewhere. So the challenge is going to be how you do more with less or with at least the same amount of money. And if you can manage that balance, then I think you can, and if you get most of these principles right, I think you'll be well on your way to a successful transformation. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, let me double down on a couple that you talked about, Paddy, and I'll combine them. And that's really the digital roadmap, which we spoke about the need for that, and also the cross-functional buy-in. So Paddy already gave away one of the keys to success and have a very broad stakeholder community. The other thing is to make sure you have the right leaders with you. So if you do find yourself sort of leading this or supporting it, make sure that you're not alone and it's not being this IT-driven sort of thing. You should surround yourself. This is basic, but it's amazing. Sometimes we just forget, I think, because there's so much going on. But your peer group. So to Paddy's point, when this was presented to the leadership, to the board, well, I had the privilege of being the leader and bringing everyone together. It was really, half of the individuals were clinicians. Every major experience track that we had was led by a clinician and an administrator. And so everyone owned it to the point, including having patients helping with your strategy. So never forget the patient. And I know we're all patients, but even when we're patients or our family members are patients, it's not the same experience because we have this knowledge of healthcare that others don't. So try to include patients, and we had one in our committees, always getting that patient experience. And the final thing I'll share, and we didn't include on this list, but we talk about it quite a bit in the book, is the whole concept of being agile. And so it's really important that if you expect your IT to deliver on the promise of digital for your organization, if you're doing it in the same way you've always done IT, you will fail. You'll have suboptimal results. You can't create this digital experience using the same techniques, the same governance, the same financial models that you used 5 years ago or 10 or 20 years ago. You have to completely reimagine IT. We're big believers in agile. If you look at very successful digital first companies, they're all agile. We're not talking about agile PMO or agile ops dev or apps dev, but we're talking about the entire organization of IT functioning agile, reforming, reshaping, acting as you would if you worked for Facebook or for Pandora. So it's really remaking yourself and your organization, your IT organization. Otherwise, you'll be suboptimal. You won't hit your organizational goals. And just frankly, the organization may look outside of healthcare to bring someone in who they think has that experience. But there's no reason to let that happen. You can do it. You just need to morph into this agile transformation yourself, and then you'll hit all these gates with a lot more success and velocity.
Right. Thank you, Ed, for pointing out the agile aspect of it. I know we have a whole separate chapter on that in the book, but really what we're seeing is that you build in increments. You're not going to wait 18 months before you see your MVP. No one has the time or the patience for it anymore. Your MVP has to be 6 months or less, and that's how you show some value. And then you seek more funding, and then you build on the success. And you cannot do that if you are operating in your traditional waterfall model or whatever. And again, this is software terminology, but really it's now become a way of working in the digital in a digital era. So thank you for that, Ed. All right, we're actually done with the present. A little bit more of my firm, so you can go to my website and you can get a lot of. We do a lot of research, and we give it all away, so you can actually go in and download some of our white papers and research papers. I host a podcast, The Big Unlock. I invite you to subscribe to it, and Ed's been on my podcast a couple of times, and I feature a lot of CIOs and chief digital officers, and they've all been very generous in sharing their experiences, their best practices, so their own challenges and some of the failures and how they built on top of that. And I also publish a weekly newsletter that I invite you to subscribe to, where I include a lot of our research. We include stuff from what is going on in the market, and also a lot of contributed pieces from thought leaders in the industry. And that's kind of it. This is my firm's offerings. I won't spend any time on this. And that's me in my designer mask and a copy of the book. So with that, I think we are, we have about 15 minutes left, and we're right on time where we wanted to be. Ed, any closing comments before we open it up for questions?
No, I think that Paddy did a great job describing, the state of digital today and what I like, and it's in the book today. We're not pitching a book, but because we wrote the book, we're forced to investigate and research all this, but there's a lot of good evidence, right? This is not just theory or some couple of people's opinions, but a lot of this is from CHIME focus groups, from CEO focus groups. I think Paddy mentioned 150 interviews, plus a lot of empirical research. And so these models and frameworks that we threw at you, these are really practical tools you can use to do self-assessment, help you on your digital strategy. So I'm just excited, actually, to share all this information with everyone, to help everyone, because I know from talking to the CEOs, they're all under a lot of pressure to digitally transform their organizations, not just because of COVID, but that was the direction we were headed anyway. And the more we can do to empower ourselves as CIOs and CDOs, the better we can support our organizations. And really at the end of the day, and Paddy and I talk about this a lot, is really to help people, to help patients, and to deliver higher quality of care. So that's really the heart behind all of this. But yeah, we're ready to take questions.
Thank you, Ed. Erin?
Yep, I'm here. So just be sure to type any questions that you have into the chat box there, and I'll read them on your behalf. And Paddy and Ed will be sure to answer. First, I did get a comment stating, Paddy and Ed, great presentation. So that's that's nice.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
So the next question I've got is, for health systems that are a little bit behind in their digital journeys, how should we approach the transformation?
Yeah, this is one we get all the time. Ed, I'm going to let you go first on this one.
Well, yeah, so buy the book. No, I'm just kidding. Use the model and framework that we put in here. Where are you today? You probably realize, because of that question, that you're probably in model 1. You're kind of at the base level. And then what do you do? And, there's several things. Reach out to your peers. And that's another thing that's great about CHIME. Reach out to your peer, someone who maybe is a little bit ahead of you on that journey, and just ask them. I do that all the time. People call me all the time. So that's really important, is do some research. And again, Paddy has done a lot of great research with his organization that you have access to. Do some research and just find out, again, sort of where you are and what you need to do to meet expectations. And then, you know, the obvious ones, talk to your CEO, talk to your C-suite, talk to your peers, find out what's going on, where you're trying to go, and how do you align digitally with all that. So how do you digitally enable your enterprise? And what you'll find too is the level of maturity differs quite a bit. There's the same sort of different models. You have some very mature organizations that have a very defined plan, and digital is embedded in that plan. It's just part of the fabric of that plan. That's sort of the highest level. Very few have attained that. So you'll probably find yourself, especially with that question, in an organization that maybe doesn't have as a defined plan, or certainly doesn't have the tech capability, digital capability built into that. So you need to find out and then align with that. So take all the research, find out where you are, talk to the C-suite and others about where we want to be, where you want to be. That'll give you your gap. And again, talking to your peers, looking at some of the research, you'll be able to stitch together a really nice strategy that's executable and that you can work towards. So that would be some sort of high level advice.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that while you may think that you're behind the marketplace, there are things you can do to quickly come up to par with some of your peers. And you know, the important thing here is to focus on what is truly important for the organization at this time in terms of digital enablement. It could be a simple thing like, okay, I want to have the ability to offer virtual consult for, you know, an expanded range of specialties and subspecialties, and that's my single, you know, agenda. Okay, maybe that's it, and maybe that's what you need to, you know, to stay afloat and to come up to par with your peers. But then use that as a building block, and then build out the roadmap for the future. You know, it can't be a once and done, and you don't want to do it in an isolated fashion. You want to make sure the whole organization is behind you. The good news is there's a lot of technology solutions that are available to help you really kind of accelerate your progress. And I think in today's context, boards and the C-suite and everyone, they're all very open to the idea of making investments. That are across the board observation. There's no one out there who is saying digital is not important. Everyone acknowledges that if anything, digital is even more important than it was 6 months ago. So I think you're going to have a very receptive audience. And you know, if you target your investments in the right kind of initiatives, you can show quick results, and then you build on top of that. That's what I'd say.
Okay, so the next question I have is a kind of a couple questions that all link together. So I'll read it out, and if you need me to read back anything after you're done, just let me know. Any suggestions for getting the organization energized for digital transformation? Where do you find that the decision-making lies within or lives within the organization for moving forward? And is it with the C-suite, board, steering, or committees?
Ed, you've lived this, so I'm gonna defer this one to you.
Yeah, you know, it's so much depends on that particular organization and its culture. As Paddy said, thankfully, most organizations are digitally aware, and they realize they need to do something around the experience. I think storytelling is probably the most powerful thing that you can do, and tell stories of how digital transformation can really transform the organization, how care is delivered, and the impact on patients, the impact on their families. So that's what we did. We did a lot of storytelling, like imagine if, so today, here's how it works. And you know, you describe how it works today, and it's cumbersome, it's expensive, it's a horrible experience, customer satisfaction is low, those sorts of things. And then, you know, the clinician burnout, and then what it could be with digital tools. And you describe that, and I think you get people excited about what the future can be. You know, something as simple, I'll give you a really simple example, because I use this, is I showed how our organization had 27 different apps. So you're a patient. So my story, I take my phone, I go in the app store, and I'm like, I won't say who it was because it's a great organization. Everyone's doing a great job. But anyways, I get on there. I was like, okay, I'm a patient. Which app do I download? And why do I have to have a different app to pay? That's confusing. Why can't I pay through this app? Now imagine, and then you give a different scenario where it's one app and I can pay, I can do all my scheduling, I can do this just amazing experience. Oh, and I control, because I'm the I'm the person in the family that controls, you know, our children's healthcare and wellness, and my spouse as well. So now I can do it all, you know, because we have the right security built in. So you describe these different experiences. I find storytelling is one of the most powerful ways to get people excited. And the second practical thing I'll give you, I mean, we could talk all day on this. I'm trying to keep my answer short, but I give you practical. So storytelling, practical, number one. The second thing that you can do is find a like-minded person. I guarantee you there's someone like-minded, progressive, and just go do something. So depending on your role, right? Hopefully if you're a CIO, you've got some sort of discretion. It doesn't have to be expensive, but go out and do something and prove it. It might be RP, remote patient monitoring for COVID, or it might be a simple app, but do something and show the results. And then you get people to start thinking. I was telling a story, I can't name the health system, but I was with the health system earlier this week, I mentioned. And then the CEO started telling stories because he understood, you could tell that he understood the potential with all this digital transformation and capabilities. And he started telling stories. And so be really practical, do something small, and then prove that case and then build from it. 2, tell lots of stories.
I really don't have anything to add to what you said. And I think you kind of covered the whole essence of what it really takes to kind of, you know, build this whole momentum within your organization. All right, Erin, any other questions?
Yeah, we do. We got another one, and this one's a little bit of a longer one too. Let's see. We are starting our digital transformation, and a challenge we are running into is how do we effective staff for it? Sorry.
Staff for it. Oh.
Yep. How do we effectively staff for it? Some patients adopt the tech and some don't. So our staff have to balance patients both digitally and the more traditional routes. Have you ever seen organizations overcome this challenge?
I'll take a crack at this, Ed, and then I'll turn it over to you as well. I think, you know, the engagement modalities are shifting. This is one of the fundamental facts about digital transformation. You know, your consumers are transforming in terms of their own digital engagement with all kinds of things, especially in the wake of COVID, right? You know, before the pandemic, how many of us thought about shopping for groceries online, just as an example? Right? Now, how many of us thought about shopping for healthcare online? Not many. Right? But as consumers, I can tell you, as a consumer, I can tell you that I do not want to go into a clinic if I can avoid it. Right? I just don't. And so I am looking for ways in which my provider will enable me to get what I need. And therefore, if I start looking at it from the other side of the table now, as a provider of healthcare services, how do I understand the experience that the patient is looking for? So now that brings us to the core of what digital transformation is about, which is about building these engaging, seamless patient experiences. The technology is an enabler. You can get, you know, all kinds of technologies to do all kinds of cool things, but unless the experience feels intuitive, seamless, and you know, delivers what the consumer is looking for at a time and place that they need, it's not going to work for you. There's a reason why Apple, you know, the whole Apple ecosystem works so well for consumers. There's a reason why we talk about Amazon all the time. You know, the reason why Amazon's shopping experience works so well. There's a lot of work behind the scenes that's gone on. Healthcare is still in very early stages. And so I think health systems and those who are leading digital initiatives have to pay attention to the experience aspect of it and put that front and center while, you know, building out their roadmaps and executing their digital roadmaps. Ed, any comments on that?
Yeah, I'll just have a couple other practical things to add to that. So one is in terms of, you have to be bimodal. You're still gonna have very traditional, you gotta cater to everyone depending where they are in terms of their digital adoption. So you don't wanna leave anyone behind. You certainly wanna nudge people. So one example would be, and it depends on your health system, but we had one primary facility where we had the most foot traffic, and we had a genius bar. So we had our digital genius bar there. So if any patients, of course, this was pre-COVID, but they'll come back. Well, they're back already. They could come to that bar with staff by one of our digital team, and they could work from there and be productive. But when they had customers, patients or families come by to help them. And then on staffing, right, especially because of COVID, most organizations are very open now to hiring from outside of their city or their town, right? It used to be you have to sit there in an office, and I think we kind of blew that up, and hopefully it doesn't go back all the way to where it was. So now more organizations have become progressive. It's like, yeah, it's hard to find talent in Cleveland or in, whatever city. And maybe they're more on the West Coast. So now I can actually hire people that might live in these areas of higher concentration of digital skills, and they become part of my team. So that's one way to sort of overcome the staffing issue. Of course, there's always sourcing as well, but if you want them to be your own employees, there's no reason why they have to be in your office, local anymore. So those are a couple of sort of practical things on that front. Erin?
Okay, so we've got time for one more question. The question I've got here is, in the maturity model that you showed in one of the slides, where are most health systems today, and how do they move from one stage to the next?
This is, I think, this is something we touched on very briefly. And this is, I think, one of the core questions that health systems, digital leaders in health systems have to answer for themselves. The first part is really about understanding where you are and comparing yourself with your peers in the market, and then developing a plan for closing the gap, assuming that there is a gap between you and your peers. We did, I'll give you one example. We did some work for a health system in New York City. And one aspect of that engagement was really this benchmarking against all of their peer group health systems. And we actually went deep into it, and we tried to understand what health systems in New York City were investing in, what kind of tools, what kind of programs, how are they engaging with their patient populations? Are there any differences between the patient populations, and are they focusing on one thing more than another? And that gives you a sense of where you stand in your competitive landscape. But then the next thing you have to do is, where are you today in terms of your technology maturity and digital maturity, and use the 4-stage model that we presented earlier. And then aspirationally, you can't go from 1 to 4 overnight, but you can definitely go from 1 to 2, and which is what a lot of the health systems are doing. So you get past your EHR system and start looking at the landscape for all of the other technology solutions that can enable you to get to the next level of digital maturity, which you'll have to define for yourself. Your next level of digital maturity may be that you want to get, and you have to have a goal for it. And I know, when Ed and I worked together, we actually worked on something similar. You might decide that you want to shift X% of all your ambulatory visits to predominantly telehealth mode or virtual mode, or Y% of some specialty from in-person visits to online visits, or something like that. Now, how do you go about building that? Because then you have a goal, and you accomplish that goal, and then you're able to figure out a path from here to there, which will actually inform you for all of the other initiatives that you're going to invest in, and then the maturity model in that way. So it requires a little bit of maybe taking a half a step back to really understand where you stand in your market, and then move forward. But then more likely than not, you will make much more progress in the quarters down the road. Ed, you have anything to say to that?
Yeah, I know we're at time. I'll give you 15 seconds, and I most of my talks have some variation of the following. To be digital yourself. So if you're going to lead it, if you're going to try to move your organization, whatever you're doing, if you want to really succeed, you have to model it first. So do whatever you can, be digital, and I think success will follow. Erin?
Thank you.
Well, we've come to time, so I'm just going to say thank you to Paddy and to Ed for presenting today. I just want to thank everyone else who's attended. We appreciate it. And please be sure to complete the survey that's going to pop up in your browser post-session. Again, we really appreciate all your feedback. And then Paddy and Ed, any closing remarks?
No, thank you very much. I think we appreciate everyone staying on. We hope they got something out of the presentation. Thanks again, Ed, for being on this.
Yeah, thanks, Paddy. No, it's always fun. Thanks, Aaron. Go CHIME. Love CHIME.
Yeah. Love Chime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye now.
you. Have a good afternoon, everyone.